everyone, welcome to the Searchlight Sessions. I am your host, Maggie McClure, and today I am very excited to have with me special guest, John Sullivan, coming from Los Angeles. Welcome, John.
Hey, Maggie, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. So I'm going to tell our viewers a little bit about you. John Sullivan is a film producer who has produced a number of films and a lot in Oklahoma, including Gosnell, The Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer, and the documentary America, Imagine the World Without Her, as well as his latest project, Reagan, about the former president featuring Dennis Quaid. So very exciting things going on in your world. We're excited to talk to you and get your insight and input on a lot of different topics here. Let's just jump in and start with, how did you get into this business? What inspired you to get into the film industry?
Yeah, I actually started off in the music business. I started off in concerts as a teenager. I did a lot of events. And I was like the DJ at our high school dances, and that just kind of moved into concert promotion. And then I worked for a couple companies. I worked with Bill Graham Presents. I worked with Pace Concerts, and then left that business and transitioned into film, and actually went back to film school. But I went for visual effects, thinking I'd work at like ILM or something like that. And I worked on a couple projects as like an intern and some other stuff right out of college, and really did not like that side of the business. I realized that was not for me. What actually got me into the business, I actually worked at a church and volunteered with kids, and somebody donated some video equipment. We just started making movies and other things like that. And that translated into kind of making movies. My first movie I made was called Expelled with Ben Stein. It was a documentary in that. And, I was approached by somebody to make that film, and I had the production skills and worked, as the kind of line producer on that, which is a lot of times what I do, the logistics and everything else on that side of it. So did that movie and been in the business for about almost 20 years now. So
very cool. And have you lived in Los Angeles this whole time?
Pretty much. I lived in Vancouver. I did grad school in Vancouver, and that's where I started kind of doing films there. Also had a couple films that went into film, a couple film contests and festivals. We had one that played, I think, like 80 film festivals, and that helped a bit, not a lot, but it helped a bit get name recognition out there and stuff. And it was a good experience, and it really helped the director. I was more the producer on that, putting it all together for him. But and then Los Angeles. And as you said, I've filmed a lot in Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, 80 film festivals, that's quite the accomplishment.
Yeah, it was. It was really weird too, because I didn't even know what film festivals I was going into. It'd be like, I just got this list one day from the director, and I was like, wow, how'd you get all this done? And he goes, we just submitted and they just took it. And it was a shorter film, but like it helped. It had a great concept. It was a very funny concept. It was called The Hitchhiker. And the director was Jason Good on that. And it was a great concept, and it just really connected with audiences.
That's awesome. Well, I know in a lot of situations, the director is very involved with selecting music, sometimes more than the producers, but I've been in situations where the producers can be more involved with the music than the director. What's it been like for you with the projects that you've worked on?
It's been interesting because I often serve as a producer and director and sometimes a writer. So I'm often involved in the creative process along with the logistics part of it, of arranging, trailers arriving on sets and, crew and all that stuff. And a lot of times it's a collaboration most of the time, to where, we as a team are looking at what is the best creative choices we can make within our budget, and what does that look like? And something that struck me early on when I was really looking to get into film, I'm trying to remember who said it to us. I was at a film festival and somebody just made a comment that music particularly is like a character and you have to treat it that way. And I've always treated it that way. And to me, it's always like another character in your movie, whether it's the score or whether it's music you license or you have created in that way. So often it's a very collaborative, for me, it's always been a very collaborative process. I think also because of my music background, and I'm a pop culture junkie, is like I usually know a lot of music, like, and I have a very eclectic taste, all over the board on stuff. So, although I realize now a lot of my daughters, I have teenage daughters, and they told me all I listen to is old music, which happens to be stuff like Beastie Boys and Public Enemy and Run DMC. So I listen to a lot of 80s rap, so yeah, but it's a very collaborative process with a director often, as we're going through stuff.
That's awesome. Well, and I'm sure it's very helpful with people you're working with to have the musical background and a musical taste that you have. So that's awesome. So in the movie Reagan, you guys have some scenes where there's some musicians featured on camera, and some are more background and some are more featured. I don't know how much we're allowed to talk about the details, but when you're casting for musicians in general, maybe in a more background situation or a featured, what are you looking for? And can you explain the differences between the two when you're casting for a background or a featured musician role?
Yeah, I think the key thing, like with Reagan or anything of that nature, is it's basically a period piece, right? It's set. Many of the scenes are set either in the 40s, the 50s, or the 80s, and that's 70, anywhere from 40 to 70 years ago. And so there's a look, there's a feel, there's a style, and it's so if it's like in one particular scene, it was more of a background band playing and stuff. In that sense, they really needed to look like they were from the 80s, and they had to look there. Like, luckily, our director Sean McNamara was at the Reagan inaugurations. One of his first jobs in the business was actually working audio. And it happened to be for the Reagan inauguration. And so he was the guy plugging in cords and cables during that time. So he could tell us exactly, like, it was more like this, it was more like that. And like tuxedos were like this. And also we'd reference photos and things of that nature. And again, in that situation, it's one of the inaugural balls, and there's like 10 of those that happen. So there's different looks and feels to all of them. But it was really about getting the authenticity right of that moment. And I think that's the other thing too. The other performances that are a little bit more key was trying to get, somebody who could bring a performance and feel like, they're authentically a performer in that moment, whether it be in a nightclub or at a party or whatever. But it has to feel like it's authentic in that moment.
Right. Well, speaking of, it being in a certain period, so the instruments need to look authentic to that time as well, correct?
Yeah. And again, going to like the inaugural balls of Reagan in 1981, those, synthesizers looked a little bit differently than they do today. Guitars looked a little bit different, not so different in that way. But, drum kits look different. Everything kind of looks a little different than, it does today. So it's matching that up. And stuff too, like stands, the weird stuff like stands, like, having an eye to detail of like, did this stand exist in 1981 or, and it's amazing how much time you spend on those details and other people spend on those details that go into it. But that's also, I think, what helps the movie keep its authenticity is when you have period correct stuff happening in that way. There's also like hairstyles and, clothing styles and things like that all matter too. And also the way performers held themselves, differently than they do today even, the 80s were a very different time. And it was a little bit, I would say, more, I don't know, like a little bit wilder times or whatever, but it just seems like performers were different than they are today.
Yeah, all very helpful to point out here. Even like things like the microphones or the mic stands, like you're talking about, it really, those details matter.
Yeah, I mean, like today you have so many like Shure wireless, microphones dominate, but back then it was a lot of corded microphones, or they'd have the really weird antennas sticking out and stuff like that. They might, and they were like those silver big round ones. They, just very different looking microphones than we have today, and getting those details right, amps, other things like that, are all really help. It takes you out of a scene. I think if you're suddenly like, whoa, that was like something like not period correct or something, or that wouldn't have been there. You know, for us, luckily, a lot of instruments have not changed. A trumpet and a trombone often look very similar to what they did before. Guitars, bass guitars, all look very similar. But it is the amps, the microphones, keyboards were the big one thing I remember.
Yeah, and the colors too, probably.
Oh yeah. It was, back then it was like very sparkly. Everything that was very new to have like very kind of like flaked metal flake like guitars and stuff like that. And again, people started in the 80s really experimenting with 70s and 80s, developing new guitars and what they look like. Like Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick developed all kinds of different guitars, and that influenced other guitarists. And so yeah, all that stuff looked very differently. And the keyboards, I keep going back to the keyboards, but they were so different. Yeah. Very heavy, very thick, very big.
Yes.
On that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are some things that are important for background musicians to know when they're going to be on set? Maybe they haven't done it before and they get cast for a scene because they have the right look, they have the right instrument. What are some tips that you would give them?
I think the first thing is really kind of do your research. Know what period you're in. Know what that looks like. How did they move? How did they hold themselves? Are you part of like an R&B band that would have been maybe a little bit more out there on something, or is it something a little bit more restrained? But I definitely think that artists held themselves much differently than they over the decades. I mean, they're often reflective of their culture, or they're pushing their culture in a way, and so they might look different. I mean, Bootsy Collins is going to look very, very different than what a bass player might look like today in an R&B. And there's distinguishing looks, I think, for people as they go through. But it's also not just a look, the mannerism. Are you holding yourself in a certain way and doing something that would be within the time period? So first thing is just research. I mean, really watch. There's so much videos now with YouTube and everything else to watch that I think it's very important. And remember, you're going to be probably featured up on screen for a chunk of an emotional period, like music. And often when bands and stuff play, somehow it's often an emotional moment, whether it's like a first kiss or it's like a moment that's coming together. That just remember that too. You're part of a moment. Know your scene and what context you're coming into, so that you're able to kind of blend into it and function to serve the scene as much as anything. It may be that you need to be outrageous, and so go fully outrageous, or it may be that you have to be more just subtle and restrained. And also, what's your position? Are you like a lead singer? Are you a background singer? Or what is that? So yeah, I mean, to me, those are the two biggest things: is know the scene and know that context, and then know the time period.
Awesome. Very helpful advice. Thank you for that. So scenes where musicians are playing can be challenging to make it look like it's really happening. So we all know a lot of the time dialogue is the focus, not the band, not the song, not the music. So how have you handled that situation on set? And what are some tips you'd give to filmmakers when they are planning to have live music on camera?
Yeah, and exactly. Just to break down the process, as you were saying there, a lot of times, when we're doing it, the band has to look like they're playing, but there's actually no music being played. There might have been probably started playback, probably did a take or two with playback where we play the song, and you walk through the band doing their thing, and then you kind of then go in for your coverage on the actors to do their dialogue or whatever needs to happen. So, I think the first thing on that is know what song you're playing or what song you're playing on. So look, you've got coverage that looks real, because they, as editors go in and the director looks, they're going to cut around. So it needs to look like you're in the same place playing the same song at the same time, and correctly doing that. I think also, people can't just, like, singers can't mouth words. They have to actually sing, which is a very weird thing to sing silently. I know I've worked with a singer before who had a problem with that. They're like, I've never done this. And like, they're a very big singer and they've done very big stuff, but they're like, I've never done something like this. And so they had to really practice for like a half hour doing it, because they were like, I've never done this before and I want it to look real, and rather than just mouthing the words. Because I think there's you can tell the difference when somebody's singing and somebody's mouthing words. And I think that's one of the big things too, in that. And then also you've the hard part, I think, for some people, you got to match your performance time and time again. You're acting, so you're giving a presentation. So if you're going to, throw your head back at this part of the song and throw your guitar up, you got to do that every single time and every single take. So just make sure, like, whatever emotions you're going through, if you throw something in there randomly, it kind of messes us up on the other side for editing. So it's just like, and often I'll be honest, like what I've seen and worked on is, I don't think as directors or producers, we're often coming with a lot of choreography or coordination on that. I think we're often asking the band to have done their research and to looked at that. So a lot of times we're relying on the band to know, like, hey, are you guys going to move this way? Are you going to be in tune? Are you guys going to be in sync with each other? Like, what are we doing here? Like, directors will probably give a little bit of guidance on that, but a lot of times the background band has to come up with that themselves, or are relied on to come up with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I can say from personal experience, you just have to figure things out and make quick decisions, and just be flexible and adaptable and follow directions. But also, yes, like you're saying, have it all planned out as much as possible. Know the song as much as possible. Know the lyrics if you're singing as much as possible.
Yep.
And do the same thing every take, so you can make it as easy as possible in the editing process.
Yeah. And that's what I think that's the big thing you have to remember, is that this is going to be edited. It's not a one take concert situation that, is living in that moment. It's something that's going to be 4, 5, 6, 15 takes. And each take has to basically be the same in most contexts.
Yeah, definitely something to keep in mind for sure. So for editing, while we're talking about editing, as you know, a lot of productions use temp tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, maybe it's a dream song that the director or producers or someone would really like for it to be there, but maybe in reality, that song is going to cost way too much. Have you ever come into an issue where someone's fallen in love with a certain song that in turn it ends up that they can't really afford it? Maybe they have to end up replacing it with something similar, maybe from a local artist or an indie artist. Have you had experience with that?
Yeah, I have. And, that's one thing I always tell directors, like, and I tell editors too, is like, I'm like, if you're going to pull something and put it in as a temp track, let's discuss it, because I don't want somebody falling in love, as you said, with this, and we may not be able to get it. I mean, like, I've been lucky enough that we've gone after big music, and we've been able to get a lot of it, and had the budget for it. But there's been stuff we've wanted and could never license for whatever reason. So it was like, don't fall in love with it is one of the first things we say. And so there's a couple different ways you can tackle that. We've done it to where we couldn't get them, when you're licensing music, it's split up into two different parts, right? There's the master recording part, which is where the vocals, the music, all that stuff is part of it. And then there's the publishing part, which is the writing part of it. And you have to pay those two parts of the equation there. And often one piece will say, well, I will give you it for this amount, but it has to be on most favored nations with this group over here. So if you're suddenly paying, I'm just making up a number, $20,000 for a master recording, you're now paying $20,000 for publishing. Where maybe you do something with a local artist, and we've done this before, is we went in and we paid, an artist to redo a song, and we paid them $5,000 here, and they said, okay, we'll do $5,000 for publishing. And we've had to do that a lot. to where we don't use the original artist, but we go back in and use other artists, but we use a well-known song. And that way, again, it's kind of a character and a part that grounds the movie, I think, for a lot of people. But we've also gone in where we've said, okay, we're just going to use local talent to write something for this. Let's put this out there and get a couple pieces back. And it's been amazing to see that happen on a couple films, to where, either a composer worked with a group and or somebody brought somebody to us and said, hey, this song worked for you guys. And we're like, well, this kind of feels right. Do they have anything else in their library? And they're like, well, we'll write something for you. We've had that happen too. So it runs the gamut, but I think the big thing, like you said, is don't fall in love with something because you may not be able to afford it. And I feel like music's getting more and more expensive, not less expensive, even though at least for movies and such, and television, I feel like it's that way right now.
Yeah. Well, when you guys go to film a scene with musicians playing a song, when you've gotten to that point and you're filming it, do you have clearance on the song already most of the time, or how does that work? Sometimes we've gone in and just filmed a scene and said, okay, we're going to do this, and we'll kind of figure it out later. We'll figure the rights out and everything else later. And a lot of times, though, we at least know the publishing side of what it's going to cost us, or have a ballpark on that. So we're not just shooting in the dark. Because I've had songs come back and I've had artists say, yeah, we'll do it. It's $100,000 for the publishing, and you're like, gosh, so I got to pay $100,000 for publishing, and I have to pay $100,000 for masters now. It's a $200,000 song. Do I really want that song? And you're like, no. So yeah, we at least have a ballpark of what we know, like what we can get something for. And having worked and done a lot of music that we've licensed, I kind of know who's more expensive, who's not. Like if you're going to go for a Rolling Stone song, it's going to be very, very expensive, no matter even just for publishing on that. But if you go for older songs, stuff like that, you can kind of get a ballpark knowing that. And then there's other times we know exactly what it is. We're licensing it out, and we want this person to sing it. Particularly if you're on a lower budget and you have no wiggle room, you've got to know that. So I would definitely recommend going into that saying, we want this song from, and we're going to do it this way. We're either we know what the master publishing is going to cost us, or we're going to have another group redo that song for us. Very good advice. Thank you. Yeah, I've been working on a film recently where the director fell in love with a very popular song. And even though it was only about 5 seconds of said song in the movie, he was very married to that particular recording also. And it took a lot of negotiating to get an agreeable price. And it actually held up the production, the entire production, this 5 seconds of music.
Yeah, it can. No, I know. We had in America, we didn't follow our own advice and kind of backed ourselves into a corner with a song, and used it. And when we were editing, and we just couldn't find an alternative, we looked and looked and looked, and we finally just said, okay, we're gonna have to bite the bullet and just pay these prices. Even that, once we agreed, it seemed like it took forever to get the rights done, because there was two songwriters, and they both had agreed, but it just took forever to get them to sign the contracts. And you're like, guys, we have a release date coming up in like 2 months. Like, at one point in time, I remember being like 2 months out, and we're like, our distributor, because that's the other thing too, is right, when you go into a distributor, I think this is the very important part too for filmmakers, or if you're making a commercial, whatever it is, you've got to come back in with a whole backup of legal documents for your distributors to get your E&O insurance, that everything's been cleared. And you've got to show all of your music licenses, on both sides of the publishing and the master. So that's a very, it becomes very legal intensive, if you will, on that side of it when you get distributors involved, doing that. So you got to have those ducks in a row, or otherwise, it's going to come back and bite you at some point in time.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, it's really important for musicians to have all of their business taken care of, their songwriter splits, everything's agreed upon and registered with the performing rights organizations. master ownership is clarified and confirmed and there's no questions on that end. I think, musicians need to be reminded that all of that stuff needs to be taken care of really before you even pitch to a project or to a music supervisor or licensing agent. Having all of that stuff together is really important from the musician side as well. So to make it easier for everyone else.
Oh, very much so, because that's going to be one of the first questions we as producers ask. I think when we go into situations like, if you're licensing a well-known song, you expect that stuff to have been done. But I'll be honest, I was in one situation where on a movie I did, I got a call 6 months after the fact. And somebody said, you've got music in your movie that we didn't approve. And I'm like, well, who are you? We paid every license fee. We, everything. We did everything. So basically it became a fight back from the person we licensed the music from and this person claiming they had the rights to it. And it was like this really weird situation. And it was a very well-known song. And, I basically was like, so all this legal action got threatened, everything else. It all got worked out in the end. And this gets really weird with some of the older music is that it may go into a catalog somewhere. And what this particular situation, what happened was there was a music catalog that we had licensed a bunch of music from. And they said, we have this song. And they represented that they had it and they had an agreement for it. But the person who had that had sold the rights off. And I don't know if they didn't disclose it or if it wasn't like well known, but the person they sold the catalog to didn't know that this sub agreement was still there and it was still valid. So luckily we weren't in a position and it just took a while to unwind and all the parties to get to like say yes. And the unfortunate was the person who really had sold the catalog was very old and infirmed and like, was not easy to reach. And it was just a weird situation, but you bring that up. You've got to have the music and all that stuff cleared out. Cause that's something I'm now very much a stickler on of saying, who has this? Do we have all this worked out? Having had this experience.
Yeah. You don't want to have to go through that again, understandably.
No, it's very weird after a movie's been out for 6 months and you get this call like, hey, we want, I think they wanted like $30,000 suddenly for using the song. And I'm like, we already paid this. And I sent them who we paid it through. And they're like, they don't have the rights for this. And I'm like, well, and then, we just got everybody involved and it took another couple months to work it out, but it did work itself out. But just make sure you're dealing with, and I think a lot of times when you have the consolidation of labels and other things like this, and if something's registered, and I've seen this even with bigger music acts, is sometimes the registrations back from the 60s and the 40s and stuff like this don't transfer quite right for whatever reason. And there's some questions there, even with much bigger acts.
Wow. That's crazy. That's actually pretty surprising.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. So have your stuff together as much as you can.
Yes.
On all fronts.
Yeah.
For everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So what advice would you give to musicians who are wanting to get their songs licensed in film and television? How would you suggest that they go about that process?
Yeah, it's I think one of the things I would do immediately is I'd find out who the major music supervisors are. Is one of the first things I would do is and I would reach out to all of them and just let them know what your catalog is. I have a few friends that are musicians that not super well known, but they've done a fair amount of television work. And usually what it's been is they've gotten to know a music supervisor along the way and the music supervisor heard them. I think the other big thing, if it's original work or if it's something, is a lot of times be flexible, like be that person that can step in at a moment's notice and provide what's needed. And, that's a lot of times where you kind of build alliances and relationships is people don't forget that, a lot of times is like, man, these guys delivered in a pinch and did a great job and did that. So be flexible. But I think the first thing is get to know music supervisors. I think that's one of the key things to do. I think also one thing I went for the first time to Real Screen last year, which was it's where kind of a lot of the unscripted reality television happens. You have all the major networks are there and everything else. I would say one thing I only saw two companies that were there doing this was music companies. I saw two groups representing musicians and catalogs. They represented multiple musicians. And I would say maybe connect with one of those companies or go yourself to Real Screen from that side of it. But a lot of times it's just relational. The other thing too to look at, the two people that really make decisions on stuff like this, if you can get to them, are post-production supervisors and again the folks doing the music supervisors. So connect with them, because it's hard a lot of times to connect to a producer or a director that way. But those are the folks that are going to help influence kind of like getting in on that. And then again, I would also connect with production companies, whether it be, there's production companies behind every single series that's out there. If you can connect and reach out to them and let them know you're available, it's key. A cousin of mine had a band and they did a fair amount of music for like I think it was One Tree Hill and the Hills and stuff like that for a while. And it was all around having a relationship with a music supervisor. So again, those are going to be your key folks to reach out to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can say from my experience, I completely agree. Building relationships with music supervisors can open so many doors, and, having an agent to represent your catalog, like what we do at Searchlight. One of the things that we do is we have a roster of artists that we represent, just like what you're saying. And there's lots of licensing agents out there. And, I've had my songs get licensed over about, I think 50, I've had over 50 placements now in film and TV and ads. And, it's happened all in different ways. It's happened through direct relationships with music supervisors. It's happened from different licensing agents. It's happened from knowing a director, knowing a producer, knowing this guy at this production company, or like you're saying, an editor or someone in post-production. It can come from so many different sources. And, that's why it's so important to network and build relationships. And like you're saying, hopefully soon we can go to events like what you're talking about and do more networking and go to those events where people are going to be open to talking to you about your music, possibly being in their projects. So all very good advice. Thank you for that. Yeah. What about general advice for filmmakers, producers, directors when they're working with musicians on set? You probably, have a little more insight into the musician side, being, coming from the music side of things. Are there certain things that maybe directors who aren't as musically inclined as you are, that you would give them some advice that maybe they might not pick up on certain things that you have?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, for directors is I think the first thing a director is, and they have to remember this, is that they're the emotional steward or the guide for the movie. So you need to know the scene and the emotion you want out of it, and then you can give direction to the band, the musicians, and or whatever's in that sequence. And again, I'm talking about on-screen performances here first, and so I think that's very important because is this. What is this scene about is going to say so much about how you play the musicians and what they do. Is it about the musicians? Is it something about like you're at this live event or a concert or something? Is it, are they supposed to be a big band? Are they about, there's so much about it, but the first thing is know the scene. I mean, that's priority number one. And then I think you can give that direction. Then you can kind of come in and know, like, and know your inflection points in the scene too. Like, hey, this is going to be very up, or this is going to be down, or this just needs to be played moderately, because again, you're the emotional steward of what's going on and our guide, and you're setting us up on this. Mm-hmm. So I think for that part of it, for directors and filmmakers, is really know that. Don't think of it as just a background. Again, think of it as a character that's there and present for you, and another element to help guide this audience along what they're supposed to feel. And music, one of the reasons I got into music to begin with is because it does move us. It really is that emotional connection. We can all remember, our favorite songs, or if there's a song that you really enjoy, or it gives you that feeling, and it may be that it's a connection to a person or a connection to a thing. Same thing is going to happen for people with this movie or television show, this piece of music. I mean, you know, look at a movie like, I'm going to go back to a classic, being a kid of the 80s, but Top Gun. I mean, Top Gun has this connection. As soon as, I'm 51 years old, as soon as I hear Danger Zone starting, it has this whole piece of my high school memory coming to life, more than just, the movie itself, or Tom Cruise singing "You've Lost That Loving Feeling," is so different than even hearing, I think it was the Everly Brothers that sang that, or the Righteous Brothers. I always get them confused. But again, you're going to create this moment. So just really connect to it, know what that is. And it's even more so with music. Music connects us even further, I think, in a way, on that side of it. So just really kind of know that. And then, also, when you're crafting music as a filmmaker and you're, putting a score together and things of that, like, again, the emotion of that moment, and sometimes you've got to really balance out. You want it to fall into the background, and sometimes you want it to take, you want it to be the foreground, so. And often I've worked on a lot of documentaries, and a lot of times we have to create emotion out of static images and other things. And music is one of the ways you do that. And it's so important. So as a filmmaker, I guess the first thing I would say is know your context, but also remember it's a character. And even then, as George Lucas would say, sound is 50% of the experience, and music, score, all of that is such a big part of that, and making that happen, not just sound effects. So it's such a great instrument of emotion, and just use it to your full advantage.
Yeah. Awesome. All really good advice. And I can add to, a few ideas here. So I've been a featured singer and musician in a scene, and I've had lots of background musician roles as well. And the direction from different directors can be so different. And I've had experiences getting on set in both situations and having little to no direction at all. And that's when you have to, like you're saying, be prepared, know what you're doing, what you're going into, how you should be carrying yourself, all of those things that you think someone might be telling you what to do, and they're not. You just have to commit and do it, and then do it every time. And then sometimes I've been given a lot of direction, which can be extremely helpful as well. And also just knowing it's good to be flexible, because you may have come prepared to do it a certain way, and then you can be directed to do it a completely different way, and you have to be able to adjust and adapt. So that's just something that came to my mind that I thought I should point out to our musicians.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, directors, having been a director and worked with directors, we're mercurial beings, and we do run the gamut. I've come into situations where I'm very much like, I have an idea in my head. I want to get this on screen. And so I'll be very, very precise with directing. And then I've had other times where I'm like, you know what? I really want to get input from people and kind of have it be a little bit more collaborative. And so it runs both sides of it. And that can happen even in the same scene, or right leading into a scene, or coming off one scene to another scene. But like, it's a very strange situation being in as a director of, doing that. And also a producer sometimes, because, we're helping along the directors, to kind of get there. And again, I've worked with some that have very strong visions of what they want, and other ones that are like, nope, let's hear what other people have to say, and what does the band want to do, type of thing. So
yeah. Well, one more thing I wanted to talk about before we close here. So obviously the pandemic, COVID, has had a huge impact on all of us, but especially in the entertainment business, and especially, with live shows and obviously with filming. So how has that affected you guys with Reagan? Can you talk a little bit, just as much as you would like to share? I don't know how much you're allowed to share.
Yeah.
But your processes, how you guys adapted, what that process has been like, how you guys have just had to adjust, and what you think moving forward into 2021 is going to look like for you guys and also other productions.
Yeah. I'll speak specifically about our production, and I can speak about, the industry. I think in general, I think the industry in general has taken some very good steps. I mean, look at, if you're on a television show or a movie of like the size of Reagan, you could be dealing on anywhere on an average day from 100 people to 200 people. That's a lot of people, and to be in close proximity to each other and coming in and out. So, there's been various thought processes and everything else, but I think the entertainment industry overall, particularly speaking about film, because we haven't come back to live events or anything like that, but film, I think the industry has made very good, strides for safety. I mean, like, if you take it seriously, everybody's talking about this Tom Cruise rant. There's millions of dollars on lines for these productions and, lives and everything else that we see happening. And, as a producer about that, you take it very seriously. And, it's something I went in and said, okay, we're going to have to just rethink how we do this. And it was hard for some people. I mean, they wanted life to go on as it had, prior to March. And it's like, guys, we're not living in that world anymore. And we've got 200 people here and we can't do that. We have to space. It's also just a lot of logistics that were added on to it. Typically we have a medical team of maybe two, like we have 2 set medics for the size of production. We went to a staff of 10 for the medical side of stuff. We had a health and safety coordinator. We have people running logistics to clean. We had extra people cleaning. We have testing going on. We ran over 10,000 COVID tests, in a little bit over a month of production there. So you have all of that, the timing of it, if you have people going out, there's a whole part of that process. So there's a lot of logistics now that go into this. And unfortunately, I think some of the smaller productions and independent films are not set up to adapt or be able to absorb that. I mean, it's expensive. It can be, I'm hearing other productions now having to be put in 10% of their budget. And we're talking like a $20 million film type stuff, put in $2 million for COVID contingencies. And that's for, personnel and testing and everything that's going on. So it's a very much, and it also, look at, a lot of times people want to be like, you come almost like a family on set, and a lot of the people I worked with on this film, I'd worked with for years and stuff, like you can't just go up and give a hug to somebody or kind of, and also you have to watch your proximity to people and things that you normally wouldn't have to do. And it's just changing the mindset. And I think the film and television industry has been doing that. And I think, shockingly, I didn't find what Tom Cruise said so bad in a way. I mean, people's lives are at stake here, and people's livelihoods are at stake here. People want to get back to work, and if you want to get back to work, these are rules you have to do it by. And it's difficult, but it's something that has to be done. I think that'll continue on through this next year, even though we have vaccines coming and getting displayed. I wonder if they're going to be required by different productions. I really wonder that. I thought in some ways the industry, like some of the larger studios, would have adapted a little bit better because they have the resources to be honest. Like it would have been, if I were Paramount or Warner Brothers or Disney, I would have like had testing labs on site type stuff. And from people who worked on shows with the various groups, they did not. But I thought there was a lot of collaboration that came across in our industry. And the other thing I found too was I was able to talk to other producers on other shows, or people have come to me. Like there's been like more collaboration than I've seen from a lot of times of drawing people together to figure out how do we tackle this and how do we move forward on it. And from that side, and I'd say also as being a crew member, realize we're under an incredible amount of stress and a whole new workload. I had to learn about HVA, heating and air conditioning units and airflow and all this stuff that I had no idea about before, that suddenly got thrown on top of me, along with, trying to understand COVID a little bit better, to understand what safety measures would really work for us and what wouldn't, and what other things we had to add, because you didn't know. And there weren't a lot of initially there weren't a lot of people when we started that really knew what to do. We were relying on our health and safety coordinators, which were great. But it was a whole new world for all of us. And I think it's gotten better in the last, 3 months. But with vaccines coming, hopefully it'll get back to normal. I'm really hoping that, as somebody who loves to go to concerts and live events, I'm looking forward to that side opening back up with, sports and everything else. So hopefully that, our world gets back to normal very quickly, but I'm sure we'll have to take all kinds of precautions and measures and things of that nature.
Yeah, it sure will be interesting to see how the next 6 months, next year unfolds with live events. And, I bet there will be some protocols that have happened in the film industry that also will start applying to music events. And it will be interesting to see how it all pans out. But yeah, I can't wait to be able to play shows for a live audience and be able to attend them as well. The live stream has been really awesome. I'm so glad that that's available. That didn't exist a decade ago like it does now. And it's been a great opportunity, but there's only, so many live streams you can do before it's like, okay, another show to the computer, and
yeah.
It's great that we can still stay engaged with fans and whatnot. But, I know just as much as I want to be playing live, our audience would love to come see us live. So I look forward to the day when we can return to that safely. Yeah. Well, what advice would you give to filmmakers if they're planning to film in 2021, going into production, as far as COVID goes, and the protocols and all the rules and precautions that you guys have taken?
Well, the first thing I would say, given my experience having just come off a major motion picture, and we're still doing some pickups and production, small pieces here or there, is if you can delay it, I would delay it. I'll be honest. At this point in time, if you can delay it till the vaccines are more widely and we kind of know what's going on there, maybe a couple months, I would delay it, just personally. But if you are going to go into it and you are going to do it, there's a paper called The Safe Way Forward. I would look at that. I would talk to health and safety coordinators that have been on other productions. I would talk to other productions. And again, I think most productions right now are being very widely open and approachable, more than ever before about this stuff. And, I've, collaborated or, shared information coming off what we did with several other productions. So I would talk to the health and safety coordinators. I would talk to the line producers, because they're the front lines of what's going on and logistically what you're having to do. Prepare to, have to bite the bullet on PPE and other, air movement and HEPA filters and stuff you never knew about before. Is going to be a lot of your vocabulary moving forward. And then just understand your workspace. I think that's one of the key things is, physically mapping out your workspace and saying, where are people going to go? How can we create that? Don't be in small spaces, or if you are, you've got to limit people there. But the key thing is, I think, just talk to other productions and see what they've done in the past, and what's worked, and what would they change if they could. Again, for us, I wouldn't have gone. We had some small spaces we worked in. I wouldn't go back into small spaces again, or we really work differently the way we do that that way. And just also get throat swab test, not nasal test. Your crew will love you for that. Compared to everybody I know has to do nasal tests, always complain. The ones that you have to do the throat swabs, they're like, oh yeah, it was great, it's no problem. The other ones are like, I hated it, it was miserable. So crews will love you if you do the throat swabs versus the nasal test. But just, I would talk to people. First thing, just get out there and talk to people about it and connect and network with other producers. And a lot of times the film commissions can connect you to those folks. So like in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Film Commission there could connect you into other productions, and they would ask us, they would come to us and say, hey, can this person talk to you about what's going on? And we were like, absolutely. We happen to know a couple of the other productions that were coming in right behind us. So we, shared information with those folks readily because we knew them. But yeah, it's just something I think you learn from somebody else's experience already. Don't try to recreate the wheel here if you can avoid that. The other big thing is you have to rethink background. Background is kind of one of your more dangerous places to come in because your crew's coming in on a weekly basis. And I think now crews understand, like, I can't be acting irresponsibly and going out and going to parties or doing this thing or whatever. But if you're bringing background folks in, you don't know those folks. They're not a regular part of your production. That's where I think some of these places that we're finding that it comes in from is through background. And so that's something we're extremely cautious with and need to be, I think, as all productions.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I know a lot of people are going to get a lot of great information from this. So thank you so much for sharing about all these different areas. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for being here. Is there anything else you would like to add before we sign off?
I think just to reiterate for filmmakers is use music, use musicians as part of your toolbox. Really understand that it's such a part of the movie experience. It really is such a great way to move people and to connect with them, and don't ignore that or discount it. Embrace it, and you can have just wonderful things happen from that. And I think create wonderful, movies and films and TV shows, YouTube even, to connect with folks on that. So just really embrace, I think, music as a character.
I love that. I've never thought about it that way, and that's a great way to put it. Thank you, John, for joining us for the Searchlight Sessions. It's been an honor to have you. This video series, remember, is built for up-and-comers in the entertainment business to help with their success. And stay tuned, guys, for some tips, some takeaways from this session to help with your success. Thank you so much, John.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Maggie.